The Architecture of Power. For those who learned that surrender is not defeat. Part 1. The Woman She Became. The dungeon smelled of cedar and leather and something electric, a scent Shannon Berks had come to associate with the best version of herself. She stood before the full-length mirror in the anteroom, adjusting the collar of her black silk blouse, studying the woman who looked back with calm, dark eyes. 34 years old. Straight spine. Hands that did not tremble. She had earned this stillness the hard way, clawed it back from a life that had tried to take it from her, and she wore it now like a second skeleton, something load-bearing, something beneath everything else. She did not look away from her own reflection. That, too, was practiced. She had spent too many years looking away. 3 years ago, she would not have recognized this woman. 3 years ago, she had been someone else's property. Niguel Maton had a gift for making a woman feel small without ever raising his voice. He had been methodical about it, chipping away at her confidence the way water erodes limestone. So slowly you don't notice until the whole structure has changed shape and you can't remember what it looked like before. He had controlled her wardrobe, her friendships, her calendar, the way she laughed, too loud, Shannon, honestly, and the way she held her fork at dinner parties and the way she expressed opinions that differed from his, which was to say, he had trained her not to. He had never hit her. She had spent years grateful for that, which was the cruelest thing he had ever done to her. Give her a reason to minimize. By the time she left, she had been so comprehensively hollowed that she hadn't been certain there was a self to reclaim. She'd stood in a hotel bathroom the night she walked out, looked at her face in a fluorescent-lit mirror, and understood with dull horror that she could not remember the last time she had made a decision based solely on what she wanted. She had checked into that hotel with nothing but a suitcase and a therapist's phone number folded in her pocket. The dungeon had been her therapist's worst and best idea, depending on the week you asked. You keep describing the need to reclaim agency, Dr. Harwell had said, in that careful way she had of presenting observations without pinning them. What does agency look like to you, in your body? Not in the abstract. What does it feel like in your hands? Shannon had thought about it for a long, unguarded moment. She had been sitting in the soft chair across from Dr. Harwell with her tea going cold in her hands, and she'd let the question move through her like water, finding its level. Control, she had said finally. Having it. Giving it only when I choose. Choosing who is worthy of it. A beat. And being the one who decides when it ends. Dr. Harwell had said nothing. She was very good at strategic silence. I know what you're not saying, Shannon had added. Tell me. That it might be more complicated than that. That dominance isn't a cure. She had paused. But it isn't escapism either. I've read enough to know that. It requires more presence, not less. More honesty. More communication. She had looked at the doctor with something that was almost defiance. It requires knowing what you want and asking for it clearly. That's not running away from what happened. That's the direct opposite of it. Dr. Harwell had written something in her notebook. I think, she had said slowly, you should research it thoroughly. Shannon had. 18 months of it. Not just the practice but the philosophy, consent frameworks, negotiation protocols, risk profiles, aftercare theory. She had found communities of people who treated the exchange of power with more reverence and more care and more radical honesty than most people brought to any relationship she had ever witnessed. She had read the clinical literature and the personal essays and the safety manuals and had come away understanding that what she was interested in was, at its core, about the deepest possible quality of attention between two people. About trust so precise it had to be spoken aloud in advance. She had trained under a professional dominant in the city, a woman named Vera, mid-50s, hands like a surgeon's, a laugh that arrived completely without warning. 6 months of observation and instruction and being tested on her instincts. Shannon had been a quick student, Vera had said, but more than that, she had been a thoughtful one, and that mattered more. The best dominants, Vera had told her, sitting across a workbench strung with coiled rope, are the ones who understand submission from the inside. Not because they've been submissive, though that helps, but because they understand the profound trust it requires. When someone gives you their surrender, you are holding something precious and irreplaceable, something they cannot hold themselves in that moment. Her dark eyes had been level and serious. Don't you dare drop it. Shannon had carried those words down into the basement she was converting, held them in her hands while she drove screws into the reinforced ceiling joists, repeated them quietly to herself while she attached the load-rated rigging hardware and checked and double-checked each anchor point with equipment designed for climbing, for actual human weight, for actual human life. She had converted the basement of her townhouse herself over the course of a full summer. She had poured her divorce settlement, the money she had fought for with her attorney and her own stubborn refusal to be bought off cheaply, into the soundproofing and the specialized furniture. The St. Andrew's cross in dark walnut. The padded spanking bench in oxblood leather, custom built by a craftsman in the city who asked no questions. The overhead suspension bar with its carefully rated carabiners, from which the Japanese-style hemp ropes hung in coils she had conditioned herself, running the fibers between her palms until they softened. She had painted the walls a deep burgundy. Hung simple Japanese woodblock prints, negative space, clean lines, the suggestion of restraint. The lighting was warm and adjustable, capable of going theater dark or amber intimate or simply present and neutral. She kept fresh water on a small table by the aftercare couch. Always chocolate, usually a blanket still warm from the dryer. She called it, simply, the room. It was the most honest space she had ever occupied. She had built a business with the same meticulous care. A private listing in a professional directory, clinical, direct, unambiguous. A thorough intake process, questionnaires, a phone call, a preliminary in-person meeting before any session was booked. Hard limits established and signed. Safe words chosen and tested. She charged well and made no apologies for it. She had 7 regular clients across 4 months of operation, every one of them vetted, every session documented for her own records. She had ended 2 client relationships before they began because something in the preliminary meetings had made the fine hairs on her arms stand up, some quality of deflection, some resistance to the negotiation framework that told her the person would not respect the structure inside the room because they did not believe the structure applied to them. These were the ones to fear, she had learned. Not the ones who said too much. The ones who smiled too smoothly when she set a boundary. Anthony Barnes had been different from his first inquiry. Part 2. The quiet man. He was not what anyone would picture if you said the word client. 41 years old. Broad-shouldered in the way that suggested he had been seriously athletic in his 20s and kept enough of it to carry himself well, but had stopped caring about the performance of it somewhere along the way. Close-cropped dark hair, silver at the temples. A face that was careful and attentive. Not handsome in the conventional, symmetrical way, but the kind of face you kept looking at because it was always doing something, always processing. He worked in municipal engineering. Structures, load calculations, the unsexy and essential business of making sure things didn't fall down. He had sent his inquiry with the methodical care of a man who had sat with the decision for some time before acting on it. She had noted, reading it, that the language was precise without being clinical, that he had been honest about things that were not easy to be honest about. His intake questionnaire had been 3 pages long, handwritten, in an engineer's neat print. She had sat at her kitchen table with a glass of wine and read it twice. I've spent my adult life being responsible for things, he had written. Structures, budgets, people who depend on those structures and budgets. I carry a particular kind of weight, the kind where if I get it wrong, something fails. Something real. I've done it for 20 years and I'm good at it, and it's cost me things I didn't notice I was paying until recently. I need somewhere I can put that down. Not permanently. Not because I'm running from it. But because I need to know there exists somewhere I can exist without being responsible for outcomes. I need someone I can trust completely to hold the space while I am not. I understand this is built, not given. I'm prepared to build it. I'm a patient man. She had called him instead of emailing back, and he had picked up on the second ring. You wrote that you need to trust completely, she'd said, without preamble. I want to understand what you mean by that. A pause. Not anxious, she had noted. Considering. I need to believe that the person holding the structure is more competent than I am in that space. That they have thought of things I haven't. That they know what they're doing. Another pause. I think. What I need is to be in the presence of a competence I can surrender to. That's as close as I can get. Something in her had gone quiet and alert. That's not something I can give you in the first session, she had said. It's built. Demonstrated. Are you prepared for that? For the building of it to take time? Yes, ma'am. The address had been. Not calculated, she'd thought. Natural. He'd said it the way you say something you mean. She had liked him immediately, and she had been careful about that. 8 months of sessions had given her a detailed, thorough knowledge of Anthony Barnes that she was increasingly aware had nothing clinical about it. She knew how he carried tension, predominantly in the upper trapezoids and the base of the skull, the occupational hazard of a man who spent his days hunched over load calculations and city council presentations. She knew that his left shoulder had an old injury, rugby, he'd mentioned once, half a life ago, that created a range of motion limit she never pushed past. She knew his escalation patterns under impact work, the initial sharp response, the settling, the third wave of genuine release that came only if she was patient enough to wait for it. She knew the particular quality of stillness that meant he was floating versus the different quality that meant he was dissociating, and she had only had to bring him back from the latter once, early on, after which they had had a thorough debrief and revised his protocol. She knew that he kept his sense of humor close to the surface and that it arrived dry and without announcement. She knew he had read widely and thought carefully about what he read. She knew he volunteered with a program that mentored young engineers from underprivileged backgrounds, and that he never mentioned it unless directly asked. She knew his divorce had been his choice and that this had not made it easier. She knew he had a sister in Edinburgh he called every Sunday, and a cat he was embarrassed to admit he talked to. She had told him about her cat, once, offhand, mentioning a vet appointment. He had remembered, 3 sessions later, to ask how it had gone. That was the kind of man he was. She had been noting, with increasing precision and increasing unease, how much she had come to know about him outside the room. How much she found herself, in the evenings, making dinner, not thinking about anything in particular, finding him at the edges of her thoughts. The specific way he said her name during aftercare, low and careful, like something breakable. The look he got when he was processing something she'd said, that slight interior focus, the quality of a man who took things seriously. She knew he was falling in love with her. She had recognized it the way you recognize a change in weather, gradually, then with absolute certainty. She had not addressed it directly because she was not ready to, and the reason she was not ready to was that she had recognized, with the particular and slightly horrified clarity of a woman who had trained herself to be honest, that the feeling had begun moving in both directions. She lay awake some nights and thought about what it would mean. The complexity of it, the framework, the professional structure, the way it could distort everything they had. The genuine concern that what he felt was shaped by the room, by the specific dynamics of the space she had built, and that what grew in that particular heat might not survive the ordinary temperature of a Tuesday morning. She lay awake and thought about it, and came no closer to a conclusion. she thought. Sometimes. But I have never been more known by someone. Not even in a marriage. Not even in what Niguel had called a marriage. Anthony Barnes had sat across from her in 45-minute aftercare conversations twice a month for 8 months and asked questions no one had ever thought to ask her, and listened. Actually listened, with the quality of attention he brought to load-bearing structures, to the answers. She thought about that more than she was comfortable with. Part 3. Negotiation. He came for coffee first. It was the Thursday she had suggested, the one where she'd told him, after that unfinished sentence in aftercare, after the almost confession, after she had met his eyes and said not tonight, to come early. We'll talk before anything else. He arrived at 5:30, 2 hours before the booked session. He was wearing different clothes than he usually arrived in. Dark chinos, a well-cut shirt in slate blue, the collar open. He had made an effort, she noticed, and had made it quietly, without calling attention to it. She found this characteristic. She made coffee in the kitchen, and he sat at her table without waiting to be asked, which told her something too. In 8 months, he had never presumed anything. Today he sat in her kitchen like someone who had decided to stop pretending he didn't want to be there. For a while they talked around it. His week, a structural survey on a century-old pedestrian bridge, the tedious politics of getting the city to fund repairs before something failed. Her week, research into a new rope technique she'd been curious about, a conversation with Vera that had given her something to think about. The coffee went warm, then cool. Then Anthony set down his mug and said, carefully, I need to say something, and I need you to hear it before I lose my nerve entirely. Which is not something I lose easily, so you understand the significance. She looked at him across the table. I'm listening. I know what we are, he said. I know the rules and I know why they exist, and I'm not. I want to be clear. I'm not trying to collapse the structure. The structure matters to me. What happens in the room matters to me. I don't want to endanger it. He paused, looked at his hands for a moment. The gesture of a man who uses precision language professionally and finds it failing him. But I have spent 8 months watching you work, watching you think, watching you be exactly who you are. And I think I would spend however many months you'd allow me watching that, and I would feel what I feel at the end of all of them. He met her eyes. I'm in love with you. I think you know. I'm not asking you to do anything with that. I just needed to say it clearly, outside the room, so you knew I meant it as myself. Not as someone in a particular state. As the person who fixes bridges and calls his sister on Sundays and is sitting at your kitchen table terrified you're about to professionally decline him. The room was quiet. Outside, a car moved down the street. Shannon held his gaze. She had been afraid of this moment for 2 months. She had rehearsed a version of it, kind, careful, redirecting, that had felt, each time she rehearsed it, like putting something in a box it was too large to fit in. She had thought about what Vera would say, maintain the boundary. She had thought about what Dr. Harwell would say. What is the fear, specifically? The fear, specifically, that she would choose again with the wrong part of herself. That she would mistake the heat of something for the substance of it. That she would open a door and find, behind it, more of what she had worked so hard to leave. But she had spent 8 months assessing Anthony Barnes. That was, she thought with the small private irony of it, literally her professional skill. Reading people. Reading what they did with power, what they did without it. Reading what someone revealed when they were vulnerable and what they revealed when they were not. She knew what he was. I know, she said, that you meant it as yourself. A breath. Anthony, I'm going to be honest with you, because I don't know how to be anything else. What I feel, she stopped. Restarted. I have been trying to determine, for some time now, whether what I feel is a function of the work or a function of you. Whether it would exist without the room between us. He waited. He was very good at waiting. I think it would, she said. I think it's you. I think the room made it more visible, but I don't think it made it. She looked at him steadily. I'm also afraid. I want you to know that. I'm afraid in ways that are specific to my history and are not your fault and are not about you. Tell me, he said quietly. I'm afraid of choosing wrong. I'm afraid of being good at reading people in a professional context and catastrophically bad at it in a personal one. She paused. I'm afraid you'll want to take care of me, and I'll let you, and then one day the taking care will become something else. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you're afraid I'll become Niguel. She looked at him. Yes, she said. Simply. I understand that, he said. Not defensively. Not with protest. Just, I understand it. He turned his coffee mug in his hands, once. I want to say something. And I want you to hear it as evidence, not reassurance. Because reassurance is easy and I know you know the difference. He met her eyes. I come to you twice a month, and I ask you to take complete authority over me. I give you the closest thing I have to absolute trust. I do that because it is the one place where I believe, with certainty, that the person holding the power will not abuse it. He paused. I know what you're afraid of. I am the last person on earth who would try to control you, Shannon. Not because I'm enlightened. Because I have sat in that room and felt what it costs to be controlled, and I know what that kind of trust is worth, and I know what it does to a person when it's violated. A beat. I'm not going to do that to you. Shannon was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the light was going gold through the kitchen window, and she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, this is what it is supposed to feel like. Being seen without being managed. Being met without being diminished. I'm not saying yes to everything, she said. I'm saying, I'm interested in finding out what this is outside the room. That's more than enough, he said. I want to keep the sessions, she said. At least for now. I need to see if we can maintain the distinction. I want to keep the sessions, he said immediately. That's separate. What happens in there is its own thing. I don't want to lose it. The power differential doesn't disappear when we walk out. No, he considered it. But it inverts. Out here, You have the power in a different sense. You built this life. You decide who enters it. He paused. I'm asking to be let in. That's not the same as taking. She looked at him across the table in the late afternoon light. No, she said softly. It's not. Part 4. The ritual. It was a Thursday when everything changed. But first, there was the session. She changed after he left, retrieved the evening's protocols from the locked drawer of her desk, reviewed his notes from the previous session, the flag she'd marked, ready for deeper suspension, requested real impact, identified left shoulder limitation update. She put on the clothes she wore in the room, black wide-leg trousers, a structured black tank, her hair pinned back with clean severity, low boots with a heel she'd chosen because they changed her posture in a way that was about presence, not performance. She checked the rigging, checked it again, laid the ropes in order of use. She stood in the room in the hour before he returned and let herself inhabit it. This was part of her process, transitioning into the headspace with the same deliberateness she required of her clients. She was not Shannon who drank coffee with him in this space. She was the person who held the structure. She did not think those had to be mutually exclusive. She was working on believing that. He arrived at 7. Exactly. He stood in the doorway of the anteroom in street clothes, dark jeans, a gray Henley, the deliberate neutrality of a man who had learned not to be too visible in the world, and she looked at him with the particular quality of assessment she brought to first contact. Reading him the way she read every session, the set of the shoulders, the quality of the eye contact, the ratio of his breath to his stillness. He was carrying something tonight. She could see it in the tightness along his jaw, the way his shoulders were barely an inch higher than usual. A week's worth of something unresolved. And beneath it, the coffee conversation still alive in him, a new quality of openness, something more permeable than the careful composure he usually arrived with. Come in, she said. Sit. He sat across from her small desk and they went through the pre-session protocol she required every time, without exception, regardless of how well she knew someone. This was not bureaucracy. This was care made structural. Green, yellow, or red, going in? Green, he said, solidly. Anything changed since last time? Body, shoulders specifically? Range feels good. Better than last month. Anything in your mind I should know? Anything from this week you're carrying that might surface? He held her gaze. The evening light came through the frosted glass of the anteroom window and made everything amber and still. Stressful week. I'd like to go deeper, if you're comfortable. Tell me what deeper means to you tonight. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was slightly lower than his street voice already, the transition beginning without ceremony. More rope. I want to not be able to move at all for a little while. I want to be held completely. All of it. He paused. And I'd like the impact work to be real tonight. Not ceremonial. She registered this. Held it. Real, she repeated. Define that for me. I want to feel it, he said. Not as sensation in the abstract. As consequence. He struggled for a moment. I want there to be a moment where I feel something that's sharp and still trust you completely. I think I'm ready for that. Inside her professional composure, something responded to that. She held the response steady, noted it, continued. Suspension? She asked. Yes. The partial hip harness we talked about last month, if you think. I've been thinking about it since you mentioned it, she said. I think you're ready. I've run through the configuration a dozen times. He nodded, exhaled slowly. Safe words. River to slow. Stone to stop. And if you can't speak, he held up his right hand, 2 fingers extended, the signal they had established in the 3rd session. Good. She rose, and the quality of the air between them changed. Then we begin. The room was warm and amber lit, the cello track she had cued, a Bach suite, slow and unhurried, all patience and resolution, a low presence beneath the silence. The hemp ropes were laid out in careful skeins on the side table, each one inspected that afternoon, conditioned, confirmed. Center of the room. Feet shoulder width. Eyes forward. He moved to the mark on the floor, a small piece of black tape, precisely placed, and stood as instructed. His hands fell loose at his sides. His breathing was already deliberate. She walked a slow circle around him. One full revolution, unhurried. She did this every session, and it was not theater. It was a reading, a professional assessment of where his body was holding itself, where the tension lived, what needed to be released before anything else could happen. She could see the weak in him, the ridge of his right trapezoid, higher than the left by perhaps a centimeter, the slight forward curl of his shoulders around whatever he'd been carrying. Strip to your shorts, she said. Fold everything. He undressed without hurry or self-consciousness. This too had been built over 8 months, the ease of it. The Henley lifted over his head, the jeans stepped out of carefully, each item folded with the methodical care he brought to everything and placed on the chair. He stood in plain black boxer briefs and waited, eyes forward, and she allowed herself, professionally, with full awareness of what she was doing, to take stock of him. The breadth of his shoulders. The architecture of a body that did actual physical labor, that had swum or run or carried things, that bore its 41 years without apology. The small scar at his left ribs from a climbing accident he'd mentioned once in passing. She knew his body the way she knew the room's rigging, thoroughly and with precise intention. She moved behind him and placed one hand flat between his shoulder blades. Felt him breathe in once, sharply, then out in a long, careful stream. The warmth of his skin under her palm. You're holding the entire week in your upper back, she said, conversationally. We'll address that. She picked up the first length of rope. Hemp. 8 meters. Conditioned until it was almost supple. She shook it loose with a practiced snap that cracked the silence. a small sonic declaration. We are beginning now. She saw his shoulders drop involuntarily at the sound, the conditioned response of a nervous system that had learned to associate that sound with permission. Arms out to your sides, parallel to the floor. She started at the center of his back. The column tie came first, an anchor point for everything that would follow. The rope crossing and wrapping in a pattern she had refined through years of practice, its crossings deliberate, its knots placed with absolute intention. Never over the spine, never compressing a nerve path. 2 fingers of slack maintained at every wrap to ensure circulation. She checked this automatically, her fingers slipping beneath each pass of rope as she worked, a reflex as automatic as breathing. The knot settled with small firm sounds. She built the chest harness next, the ropes fanning outward from the column in a diamond configuration across his sternum, framing the architecture of his chest without constricting it. She worked methodically and she worked in silence, and the silence itself was a kind of authority, not cold, but focused, present, the silence of someone doing something that requires absolute attention. She watched his breathing change as the rope went on. The initial slight shallowing as his body registered the novel sensation of being bound, the small animal alertness of it, and then, as the chest harness took shape, the gradual deepening. The deliberate recalibration. His nervous system learning, again, what it was always learning in this room. This is safe. This is structure. You are held. Tell me what you're feeling, she said quietly. Present. His voice had already shifted, lower, slower, like something turning down its own frequency. The weight of it. The pressure. It's like, he paused, searching. Like what? Like a hand on my shoulder, he said. But everywhere. Something moved in her chest. She kept her face even, her hands moving. That's correct, she said. That's exactly right. She moved to his arms, wrapping from the wrist upward in a single column cuff, checking the space at both pulse points with automatic care. 2 fingers, always 2 fingers, the circulation check so habitual, she barely thought about it. She worked up past the forearms, the inner elbow checked carefully, the bicep wrapped with the rope following the muscle's natural shape rather than compressing it. I'm going to bring your arms behind you now. You'll feel the stretch across your chest. Tell me when it reaches your limit, not when it passes it. Yes, ma'am. She guided his wrists together behind his back with slow precision, adjusting the angle by small degrees. Watching his face in the mirror, she kept positioned for exactly this. The slight flicker of expression as his shoulders opened, the particular gathering at his brow when something reached an edge, the release of it when she backed off by half an inch. She found the angle that was clean and held it, securing it with a configuration that distributed pressure evenly across both wrists. He exhaled in one long, slow, controlled stream. There, she said, and she did not disguise what was in her voice, the satisfaction of it, the genuine pleasure of watching someone arrive at exactly the right place. There you are. She could see the quality of him changing. The weak dropping away in increments, like weight lifted from a structure that had been supporting too much load. The suspension rigging took time, and she did not rush it. The overhead bar was set at the appropriate height for his measurements. She had calculated this precisely 2 sessions ago and marked the adjustment. Load-rated carabiners, each one rated to more than 10 times his body weight. Checked that afternoon and checked again now in front of him. She attached the primary suspension lines from his chest harness to the overhead anchor and took up the slack gradually, millimeter by millimeter, watching his face, his color, the rise and fall of his chest, the quality of the rope's tension. Not hurrying, not performing confidence she didn't have. Tell me when you feel the rope taking weight. Now, he said. Just now. Good. Stay there. The hip harness was the most complex work she did. She had spent 6 weeks drilling this configuration before she touched it to a human body, practicing on a weighted form, timing herself, learning the pattern until she could run it without thinking, until her hands knew it the way a musician's hands know a difficult passage. Rope wrapping the waist in a double wrap, dropping between the legs in a carefully mediated single strand designed to provide support and sensation without any discomfort at the nerve paths she had mapped. She explained each pass to him as she made it, narrating without asking permission, because the narration itself was information, was reassurance, was part of the hold. Left hip wrap, first pass. Breathe. Wrapping over your right hip now. Tell me if anything pinches. Good. Hold that breath and release. His breathing had settled into the deep, slower rhythm she associated with genuine trance entry. Not unconscious, the opposite. Hyperpresent. The paradox of deep submission. The more thoroughly held, the more intensely alive. She connected the hip harness to the overhead rig with 2 additional lines, balanced with the care of someone who understood, in a professional as well as personal sense, that getting this wrong had real consequences. She pulled each line once, sharply, testing the anchor. Then again. Then she stepped around in front of him and looked at his face. He had closed his eyes. His jaw was unclenched. She could see it in the softness at his temples. His breathing was deep and even. He looked like a man who had been given permission to put something down. He looked like someone she had known a long time, in a life she hadn't lived yet. She set the thought aside. This was not the time. I'm going to take your feet off the floor now, she said. You know what to do. Yes, ma'am. She made the final adjustments with deliberate care, taking up the overhead lines in small increments, monitoring the weight distribution across the harness. His center of gravity shifted. His feet lightened. She could see it in the change of his posture, the slight change in the rope's angle. And then, with one precise quarter turn of the adjustment hardware, she brought him up. His feet left the floor. He hung suspended in the amber light. The rope a geometric architecture around his body, the hemp lines falling in clean parallels from the overhead rig, his body's weight distributed across the harness with textbook evenness. His face was turned slightly upward, and the sound he made was barely audible, a long, sustained exhalation that carried in it something so utterly private she felt privileged to be in its presence. Not distress. The complete opposite of distress. The sound of a nervous system finally releasing its grip. I have you, she said. Her voice was steady and low, and she put everything she meant into it. You're completely secure. Every anchor point. Every line. You don't have to hold anything right now. Nothing at all. Let the rope hold you. Silence. Yes, ma'am. Barely audible. Barely above breath. She kept moving, slow circles, monitoring. One hand resting on a rope periodically to feel for any change in tension or angle. The cello unwound its patient line. The room held its warmth around them both. She thought, not for the first time, and tonight less guarded about thinking it, that this was the most intimate thing she had ever done with another person. Not despite the formality. Because of it. Because the formality was just another word for intentionality, for the deliberate and serious attention to another person's actual needs. And that was, she had come to believe, the most intimate act available. She let him be suspended for 8 minutes by the timer on her watch. Then she picked up the flogger from the side table. Elk hide midweight. The tails were long and soft by flogger standards. This implement was built for warmth and spreading sensation, for the bloom of heat across a wide surface area, for the particular kind of sensory saturation that crept up rather than struck. She swung it once beside her to feel its balance, the familiar weight of it settling into her wrist and forearm. Then she struck. The first stroke was light, almost a declaration. Here is where we are. Here is what's beginning. The tails landed across his upper back and drew downward, a slow drag of leather on warm skin, and she watched the surface respond, the pale flush beginning to rise in the tail's wake, the body's immediate language. Sensation, she said. Her voice was even, informational. Nothing more yet. Tell me what you feel. Warm, he said. Spreading. Like something waking up. Good. She struck again. More intentional this time. The tails landing in a clean diagonal across his left shoulder blade, the sound of it filling the room. A full, layered sound, leather on skin, resonant rather than sharp. His body registered it with a small, controlled movement, a slight contraction across his upper back, a breath sharply taken and just as sharply released. There, she said. She was reading the response with everything she had. Left shoulder. That's where you're carrying it. Yes. She worked that space methodically, the rhythm of the strokes settling into something metronomic and unhurried, stroke following stroke in a pattern that allowed his nervous system to begin processing each impact before the next arrived. She varied the angle, sometimes coming from the right, sometimes from above, the tails landing in different orientations across the same geography of flushed skin. Varied the weight, too, incrementally, each increase a degree of intention, each increase preceded by half a beat of assessment. His back was flushing thoroughly now, the skin reddening in a spreading blush across the upper quadrants. She could see his hands in their bound position behind him, the involuntary curl and release of his fingers with each stroke, the body's reflexive response, neither distress nor its suppression, but something more complex, acknowledgement, presence. She checked the rope at his wrists between sets, slipping 2 fingers beneath each cuff, assessing, satisfying herself. She checked the overhead line's tension. She checked his color. River, she said, not as a safe word. As an inquiry, their established usage. Still green, he said immediately. His voice had the particular quality she associated with the third stage of impact work, slower than his baseline, slightly thickened, the edges softened. Don't stop. She increased the weight of the strokes. Not dramatically, by degrees, the way you turn up a dial. Each position a considered choice rather than an impulse. The room filled with sound, the steady rhythm of leather on sensitized skin, the low cello, his breathing deepening between strokes into long, deliberate cycles. She could see the flush extending down toward his mid-back now, the heat visible from 3 feet away, the skin's surface alive. She set the flogger down. She crossed to him and ran her palm flat across his upper back, a slow, deliberate stroke from the base of his neck to the top of the rope harness. He shuddered. The heat of him against her hand was considerable, significant, the way a well-worked muscle is warm. Still with me? Yes. A beat. A breath. More than yes. She reached for the strap. It was narrower than the flogger, 12 inches of single leather, supple, weighted at the tip. It delivered a focused, precise impact that was categorically different from the flogger's spreading bloom. Sharper, more contained, a single clear line of sensation rather than the accumulated warmth of dozens. She showed it to him, though his eyes were mostly closed, the movement entering his peripheral vision, the signal that something was changing. This will be different, she said. More precise. The sensation will be sharper and more localized. Not if you want to continue. He nodded. I'm going to give you 3, she said. Tell me after each one where you are. The first landed across the widest point of his back with a sound that was entirely unlike the flogger, clean and decisive, a single sharp report, and his whole body answered it. A sharp intake of breath, the muscles of his back contracting in a wave that moved from the site of impact outward, his bound hands clenching once, hard, and then releasing. Tell me, she said. A pause. He was breathing through it. Sharp, he said. Hot. Then, just the heat. Just the place. Good. She let him have a full breath. Stay there. The The second stroke was harder. She had built to it deliberately. The whole session a preparation for this moment. The body thoroughly sensitized, the nervous system in that particular altered state where sensation bypassed its usual filters and arrived without mediation. The sound of it was sharper still, and his response was more complete. Not just the breath but a sound. Low, involuntary, bitten back, and she recognized it instantly as not pain only, as the specific register of someone experiencing something at the precise edge of their capacity and discovering the edge is wider than they thought. Stay, she said. Her voice was calm and certain. I have you. Breathe. He breathed. The sound he made on the exhale was ragged and then steady. I'm here, he said. I'm here. I know. The third stroke she placed deliberately lower. A new geography, underprepared, the full concentrated heat of the strap on skin that had not yet been worked. He made no sound at all. She watched his body absorb it in total, the contraction, the stillness, the long release, and what came across his face in the suspension's amber light was something she would think about for a long time afterward. He looked, for that suspended moment, like a man from whom everything unnecessary had been stripped. No performance, no management, no careful composure. He looked entirely like himself. She set the strap down. She moved in front of him and lifted his chin with 2 fingers, tilting his face so she could see it fully. His eyes opened, and they were dark and undefended and very present. Where are you? She asked. All the way here, he said. I don't know where else there is. She held his gaze for a long moment, longer than was professional. She did not look away. Good, she said. Stay there. She did not let herself touch his face beyond the 2 fingers at his chin. She released him and stepped back and continued the session. But the room had changed its temperature by some imperceptible and significant degree, and she thought he felt it too, because he didn't close his eyes again. He kept them on her. Wherever she moved, whatever she did. He kept his eyes on her with the particular quality of attention of someone who has stopped pretending they aren't looking. She brought him down with care. The overhead lines lowered incrementally, his feet finding the floor in stages, her hands at his waist as the weight transferred, standard practice for post-suspension, the body needing the transition managed. She kept one hand in contact as she removed the hip harness, unwinding the rope in reverse order, her fingers working the knots with practiced efficiency. Each section of rope came off, and she massaged the area beneath it. Not intimately, precisely, encouraging circulation back into compressed tissue. He made a small sound when she massaged the back of his left calf. Not pain. Sorry, she said. Don't be. The chest harness came off last. She folded each section of rope as she removed it, a methodical choreography she performed after every session. When the final rope fell away and he was standing unbound in the center of the room, he rolled his shoulders once, slowly, and she heard his spine make several small adjustments. She stepped back and looked at him. He was flushed down his back. His eyes were calm and deep and entirely present. He looked like a man who had put something down and was not certain he wanted to pick it back up again. Couch, she said. Blanket. He went. She brought the water herself and sat in the chair beside the couch and waited while he drank and gathered himself. The aftercare conversation moved at its own pace. Her questions and his answers, the slow assembly of himself from the pieces the session had taken apart. How did the suspension feel? Where was sensation now? Any numbness? Anywhere? How were his shoulders? Any vertigo? My shoulders feel, he paused. I don't have a word for it. Like I've been carrying something for months and put it down. The tension was significant going in. The strap, he said slowly. That was, he seemed to be looking for language in a room where the language lived far from him. That was exactly what I needed. The third one especially. I know, she said. I watched. He turned his head on the back of the couch and looked at her, and there was something in his face that had nothing professional about it. Shannon, he said. She met his eyes. I know what we said this afternoon. I just want you to know, he stopped. Tried again. In there, I felt you. Not just your hands. You. Your attention. He held her gaze. I don't know what to do with that, exactly. Neither do I, she said. Honest. Quiet. Is that? He seemed to be choosing words with great care. Is that allowed? She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the early evening had become full dark. I think we're going to have to build new rules, she said finally. For whatever this is. The old ones don't quite fit anymore. He nodded slowly. There was something in his expression. Relief, she thought. The relief of a man who had been afraid the answer would be different. Okay, he said. Let's build something. Part 5. The Ghost. The note was under her door on a Tuesday. She almost didn't see it. She was coming in from a run, earbuds still in, her mind occupied with a rope configuration she'd been troubleshooting in her head for 3 blocks. She almost stepped on it. The fold of the paper was crisp, precise, characteristic. She took her earbuds out. She did not touch it for a moment. She stood in her entryway and looked at it on the floor, and something cold moved through her that had nothing to do with the autumn morning. She picked it up with 2 fingers and unfolded it, and read, I know what you're doing in there. I think we should talk. N. Shannon stood with the note in her hand for a long time. She ran through the geography of her fear with the particular clinical thoroughness she had developed in therapy, naming it, placing it, refusing to let it be shapeless. Niguel was not unpredictable. That was one thing she had always known about him. He was controlled, meticulous, someone who preferred to work in implication and insinuation rather than direct threat. She had spent 4 years inside the architecture of his control, and she understood it the way you understand a building you've lived in. You know where the walls are even in the dark. He was not dangerous in the obvious sense. He was dangerous in the way erosion is dangerous. persistent, quiet, and interested in changing the shape of everything he touched. She photographed the note before she moved. Then she emailed the image to her attorney. Then she put the note in a labeled folder in the fireproof box in her office. Because documentation was what you did, because evidence was its own kind of power. Then she called her attorney's direct line. I'll start the restraining order process today, her attorney said. It'll take some time. I know, Shannon said. I'm not afraid of him. A pause. She was deciding if this was true. I'm not afraid of him. You don't have to be afraid to take it seriously, her attorney said. No, she agreed. That's fair. He came to the door 3 days later, unannounced, at 9 in the morning. She had been up since 7, and she had been in the room, running through the hip harness configuration again, the methodical repetition of it calming in the way that difficult and precise work was calming. She heard the bell from below and went up and looked through the peephole, and her stomach tightened once, sharply, and then steadied. She opened the door. Niguel Maton looked the same and did not look the same. He was 40, still lean, still angular in that way she had once found compelling. The jawline that suggested certainty, the eyes that were already moving past her before she had finished opening the door. He was wearing a coat she recognized, a good coat, an expensive coat, the coat of a man who believed his exterior communicated his worth. His hands were in his pockets. He looked at her face and something moved through his expression, adjustment, recalculation. She had changed and he had noticed. She could see him noting it. She watched him decide how to respond to it. Shannon. He said her name the way he always had, with a quality of mild correction, as though the name itself was a minor error he was generously overlooking. She said nothing. He waited. He was good at waiting, too, but in a different way. His waiting had always been a form of pressure. I'd like to come in. I know you would. The pleasant expression strained at the corners. Just slightly. She catalogued it the way she catalogued everything now, as data, as information about a system she had once been inside of and had since developed the distance to observe. Is that a no? Yes, she said. That's a no. What do you want, Niguel? I'm concerned about you. The practiced sincerity of it was almost beautiful in its construction. I heard things about what you've been doing here. He let the pause expand. I wanted to make sure you were all right. She looked at him. She looked at him for a long, level moment and thought about the woman who had spent 4 years dimming herself in rooms this man occupied. The woman who had trembled in a hotel bathroom with a phone number in her pocket. I'm excellent, she said. Thank you. Goodbye. She closed the door. Her hands were not shaking. She noticed this with quiet, focused satisfaction, the way you notice a structure bearing weight as designed. He did not go away. She found evidence of him in the following 2 weeks in the way she had always found evidence of his operations. In the peripheral and the suggested rather than the direct. A car she didn't recognize, parked across the street for an afternoon and gone by evening. The neighbor from 3 doors down mentioning, in the friendly sidewalk way of neighbors, that a man had knocked asking whether she was home. A second note, this one more direct, the implication no longer softened by even the pretense of concern. I can make things difficult. We should discuss that. She photographed it, filed it, reported it. Her attorney moved quickly on the restraining order. The wheels of the process turned. But the wheels turned slowly. And Niguel Maton had always been patient. She did not tell Anthony, those first 2 weeks. She told herself this was because it wasn't his problem and she wasn't going to make it his problem. She told herself she was handling it. She told herself all the things she had to tell herself to avoid sitting with the knowledge that the specific fear Niguel provoked in her, not physical fear, but the deeper fear of being managed, observed, reduced again, had its claws in her in the night hours in a way she had not expected. She kept the sessions. She kept them because canceling would have felt like a capitulation to him, and because she admitted to herself at 3 in the morning on a Wednesday, when she could not sleep, being in the room with Anthony, holding the structure, being completely and competently in charge of something, was the most effective antidote she had found to the cold particular dread of being surveilled. In the room, she was the one who decided what happened. In the room, nothing of Niguel's could reach her. Part 6. The thing that happened. Anthony arrived on the following Thursday at exactly 7. He was halfway up her front path when he stopped. She was watching from the side window. She had developed the habit of watching the street before she opened the door, and she saw him pause and turn with the slow deliberateness of someone whose professional instinct is to look at structural things. He stood on her front path and looked across the street and was very still for a moment. Then he turned back and came to the door. She opened it before he could knock. Who is that? He said. Not a greeting. Direct. She looked past him. The unfamiliar car was at the far end of the block, and the pale oval of a face was visible behind the driver's window, watching. Something cold moved through her. Come inside, she said. He came in, and she closed the door, and when she turned around, he was facing her with a quality of stillness that was entirely different from his session stillness. This was not the stillness of someone putting things down. This was the stillness of a man who had picked something up and was holding it with both hands. Shannon. Her name without title, without ceremony. Tell me. She told him. All of it. The notes in order, the morning visit, the documented file, the restraining order in progress. She found, to her mild surprise, that she told him without hesitation. The words came in the flat, factual tone she had practiced for her attorney appointments, stripped of everything that wasn't information. She watched him listen. He did not interrupt. He did not offer immediate reassurance. The reflexive "that's terrible, and you must feel awful" that she had learned to distrust in people who wanted to be helpful without doing the work of it. He listened with full attention and no editorializing, and she understood he was doing what he did with structural problems, taking measurements, assessing load. When she finished, a beat of quiet. Is he dangerous? The question was exact. Not in the way that makes people take it seriously, she said. He was never physically. He's the other kind. He wants to make me afraid. He wants to make me small. He's been doing it from a distance for 3 years because he knows the direct approach stopped working when I walked out. Anthony nodded once. He was looking at her with something very direct in his expression, not sympathy exactly, or not only that. Something more operational than sympathy. Have you been conducting sessions with him parked out there? She held his gaze. The last two were uncomfortable to start. I didn't let it show. But you knew. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm not going anywhere tonight. She looked at him. I know the framework, he said, before she could speak. I know what the rules are, and I know why they exist. I'm not trying to, he stopped. Tried again with the careful precision he always brought to things that mattered. I'm asking to stay. As a person, not as a client. Because there is a man in a car outside your house who has spent weeks trying to make you afraid to be here, and I don't like it. She studied his face. She thought about Vera's words. You are holding something precious when someone gives you their surrender. Don't drop it, she thought. And what is it called when someone offers you something entirely different, offers to hold the space for a change, and the offer is genuine, and you know it is genuine because you have spent 8 months becoming a precise instrument for reading exactly this kind of offering? She thought, this is not what Niguel did. Niguel's care had always had a direction to it, a current running toward his own shore. This was a different thing entirely. This was a man saying, I see that you are handling something, and I am not here to take it from you or manage it or tell you how to handle it. I am here to be in the room while you do. Let me put the kettle on, she said. They sat at the kitchen table for an hour. Not in the room. Not in their professional positions. In the ordinary kitchen with its ordinary light, mugs of tea going warm between their hands, and the particular quality of ease that had been building between them for months settling into something more deliberate tonight. She told him, because he asked and because she had decided she was done with the abbreviated versions, about the marriage in more detail than she had told anyone except Dr. Harwell. The increments of it. The way it had worked. The hotel bathroom. He listened with full and unhurried attention and did not once offer a judgment of Niguel or a reassurance of her or anything that reduced the telling to something smaller than it was. He just held it with her. She thought, this is what I've been afraid of. Not this, but that it would feel like this and then become something else. She thought, but this is the test, isn't it? And he is passing it. He checked the window twice during the hour. She noticed each time, the slight turn of his body, the brief pause, the return to the conversation without comment. The second time he said quietly, he's still there. I know. What does he want from this? From just sitting out there? To be in my head, she said. To take up space in me without being invited in. He was always very good at that. Anthony looked at her. Is it working? She considered this with real honesty. It was, she said. Before tonight, somewhat. The nights, especially. It's different, knowing someone is watching your house when it's dark. He nodded slowly. Then tonight it doesn't work. She looked at him across the table. In the kitchen light, without the room between them and its careful geometry, he looked. She allowed herself to look, fully, like himself. The self he didn't usually organize for the world. Open in the same way he was open in aftercare, but with the addition of something else. Intention. The decision to be seen. No, she agreed. Tonight it doesn't. Around 10 o'clock, the car moved. She saw the headlights sweep across the living room wall. She had migrated them there by then. Books found. The conversation continuing in the rambling, unhurried way of people who have discovered they have more to say than they expected. And then the street was dark and still. Anthony noted it with a brief look through the window and no comment. In the quiet that followed, she found herself thinking about the session. The particular quality of his presence in the room tonight. The way he had kept his eyes on her through the second half. The open, unguarded thing in his face during the third stroke of the strap. She had been in the room long enough to know the difference between a body's response to pain and a body's response to being fully met by another person. She had met him, and he had looked at her, and she had felt it. Shannon. She looked up. He was watching her. You were somewhere just now. The session, she said. No point in deflecting. He would know. He nodded. He looked at his hands on the arm of the couch, one then the other, in the way of someone assembling something carefully. I've been thinking about what you said. About new rules. About building something that fits differently. And I want to know, he paused. I want to know what you need. Not what the framework says. What you need. From this. From me. From whatever this is becoming. She was quiet for a long time. The house settled around them. Outside, the street was entirely dark and silent. I need it to be real, she said finally. Whatever it is. I need to not be performing anything, and I need you not to be performing anything. She looked at him. In the room, there's a script. We build it together, and it serves a purpose, and it's honest in its own way. What I need from outside the room, is something without a script. I can do that, he said. I'm not easy, she said. Flat. Not apologetic. I've built things specifically to not be easy to control, and I know some of that edges into. I don't always let people help me. I'm working on that. I noticed, he said, and there was something in his voice that was almost, quietly, fond. I'm telling you now so you know what you're agreeing to. I'm a structural engineer, he said. I spent my professional life working out how to make things stand up that have complicated load-bearing requirements. He met her eyes. I'm not intimidated by complicated. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The lamp made its warm circle. Somewhere far off, a car moved. She uncurled from her corner of the couch and crossed the small distance between them and sat closer than she had been, not touching him, but closer. In the territory of choice, not accident. She could feel the warmth of him. Anthony. Yes. I want it, she stopped. Found the right word. I want to try. Whatever this is. I want to try it with full attention, the way I do everything. She looked at him. But I need you to know, the room doesn't go away. What we are in there doesn't become invisible out here. That power is real, and I'm not going to pretend I don't know I have it, or that it doesn't affect things. The power goes both ways now, he said quietly. Doesn't it? She looked at him. Out here, he said, you have everything. I'm in your house. I'm asking you for things. He paused. That's not nothing. No, she said. It isn't. She reached out and took his hand. Not dramatically. Just took it. Her fingers between his fingers, the ordinary and unambiguous warmth of it. He held on. They sat like that in the lamplight, and neither of them said anything, and it was not nothing. It was, she thought, exactly what it was supposed to be. Part 7. Deepening. 3 days later, he texted her at 7 in the morning, which was new. Bridge inspection got cancelled. Free until noon. Is it presumptuous to say I was hoping I might see you? She lay in bed and read it twice and felt the smile arrive before she had decided to smile. It's a little presumptuous, she texted back. Come at 9. I'll have coffee. He arrived at 8:57 and she made him wait until 9 because some habits were worth keeping. They developed a rhythm over the following weeks that was new and slightly awkward and felt, in its awkwardness, more genuine than anything she had managed in years. He came for coffee on the weeks between sessions. Sometimes she met him in the city, a gallery she wanted to see, a restaurant she liked that he had never been to. He was different outside the room than she had expected, and exactly the same. The same careful attention, the same quiet humor, the same quality of complete presence when you were talking to him, the feeling that your words were being actually received rather than cued for response. He did not try to manage her. This was what she kept noticing, with the particular vigilance of someone who had learned to watch for it. He expressed preferences without turning them into instructions. He asked questions without them being surveillance. When she pushed back on something he said, he considered it with genuine interest rather than strategic retreat. Once, in a disagreement about something unimportant, a film she had liked and he had found overlong, she watched herself get sharper than the topic warranted, the edge in her voice carrying something that had nothing to do with cinema. She caught it afterward and said, with the honesty she had committed to, that was me being difficult on purpose. I know, he said, without heat. Does that bother you? He thought about it. It's interesting, he said. You test structures. You want to know if they'll hold. He looked at her. I test structures for a living. I'm not offended by the methodology. She had laughed at that, genuinely, surprised by it. And he had looked at her with the expression she was beginning to understand was the one he could not control. The sessions continued. She had wondered if they would change, now that the thing between them had a name, or the beginning of a name. She had worried about the blur of it, whether the structure would hold when the personal had been acknowledged, whether what happened in the room would become freighted with everything that was happening outside it. She had been wrong to worry, or not entirely right. The sessions did change, but not in the way she had feared. They deepened. The trust between them had been significant before. Now it was more thorough, the way a foundation becomes more solid with additional settling. He went further under, came up more slowly, trusted her with things he hadn't before. She held the space with the same rigor but felt the additional weight of what it meant, not as distraction, but as fuel. She cared more, and caring more made her more precise, not less. And there was something new, something she had to name for herself carefully and professionally. She wanted him. This was not new exactly. She had been aware of wanting him for some time, in the distant managed way you are aware of a thing you have decided not to examine. But now, in the room, with the space between professional and personal becoming more honestly complicated, the wanting was present in a way she could no longer comfortably ignore. She found herself noticing his body with more than clinical attention. She found herself choosing the placement of her hands with a care that had an additional dimension. She found herself, during the longer suspended silences, aware of her own breathing. She was the one in charge. She set the pace and the limits and the whole architecture of what happened in the room. And she was sitting with the knowledge that she had built that architecture partly to keep something at arm's length, and the arm had been getting shorter. She talked to Vera about it. This happens, Vera said, over the phone, with the characteristic unsurprisedness of someone who has seen everything. Not as often as people think, and usually not well. But it happens. I know the ethical framework. I know you know it. Tell me what you're actually asking. Shannon was quiet for a moment. I'm asking whether the wanting, whether feeling it inside the room, makes what I do and they're different. Less clear. Does it feel less clear to you? No, she said honestly. It feels more present. Like everything has sharper edges. Then you're not losing clarity, Vera said. You're gaining it. There's a difference between desire that clouds your judgment and desire that is itself a form of precision. You know the difference. I need to talk to him about it. Yes, Vera said. You do. Not during. Not after. Before. Part 8. Renegotiation. She told him before the next session, sitting at her desk in the anteroom, in the professional setting, because this was a professional conversation about the professional framework and she wanted it in its right context. I want to renegotiate our agreement, she said. There's something I need to be transparent about. He looked at her with full attention. His hands were easy on his knees. I'm aware of you differently in the room, she said, than I was. I want you to know that, because you should know everything that's operating in the space while we're in it. I'm not. She chose words carefully. My judgment is not impaired. What I do in there is careful and deliberate, and nothing has changed in my capacity or my attention. But I want you to know. He was quiet for a moment. Thank you for telling me, he said. It changes the consent conversation, she said. I want to know if it changes anything for you. Whether you're comfortable continuing under those. Shannon. He said her name with quiet interruption. Not impatience. Something more specific. I have been aware of you in a way that is not clinical since the 4th session. He held her gaze. I trust you completely. That has not changed. If anything, he paused. If anything, knowing what I know now makes me trust you more. Not less. Because you're telling me. She sat with that. I don't want to cross into something we haven't discussed, she said. In the room. I won't. Not without building new agreements first. What would new agreements look like? She had thought about this. Extended sensation work, she said. More contact. More explicit use of what's there between us, rather than pretending it isn't. With full consent architecture. With the same rigor we've applied to everything else. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face had opened, slowly, the way a careful man opens when he has decided to. Yes, he said. I want that. I've wanted that for a long time. Then we build it, she said. Together. Session by session. Part 9. The Architecture of Desire. She lit the room differently the following Thursday. Same amber, but lower. The kind of light that pools rather than spreads, leaving the edges of the room in a darkness that felt deliberate. She had selected music she did not usually use. Not the cello, but something slower, more minimal, a single piano line repeating with slight variations. She had spent an hour in the afternoon going through the scene plan with the same rigor she brought to every session, and she had also spent time. She was honest with herself about this, going through it with the awareness that tonight was different in kind. She had spoken the differences clearly with him in their pre-session check-in. Additional items on the agenda, more explicit touch in the rope work. Voice as a primary instrument. His senses, one at a time. I'm going to use a blindfold tonight, she had said. Your other senses will sharpen. You'll feel the rope differently. You'll hear me differently. I'm going to use that. Yes, ma'am. And I'm going to tell you what I'm feeling, she said. As I work. Not unprofessionally. As information. As part of the scene. She held his gaze. I want you to know what's present in the room. All of it. Something had moved through his expression then that she would think about for a long time. He stood at the mark. Undressed to his shorts. Hands at his sides. She tied the blindfold on first. It was simple black satin. She tied it at the back of his head with a bow. Not theatrical. Just secure. Just enough to occlude. She felt him adjust to the darkness. The slight change in his breathing. The almost imperceptible straightening of his posture as his other senses compensated. Tell me what you hear, she said. She was standing 3 feet behind him. The music, he said. Lower than usual. And your breathing. Good. She moved, 1 step to the left. Deliberate. And now. You moved. A slight smile. She could see it even in his blindfolded profile. Left. You have good ears. I'm paying attention to you specifically. She picked up the rope. She let him hear the sound of it. The soft sibilance of hemp uncoiling. A sound she knew he recognized. A sound his nervous system had been conditioned over 8 months to associate with what came next. She watched the breath move through him at the sound. I'm going to take more time tonight, she said. With all of it. She began the chest harness with the first pass of rope across his back, and she spoke as she worked. The rope is warm, she said. I've had it in my hands for a minute. You'll feel the difference. She drew it slowly across his skin, slower than usual, letting the texture of the hemp register fully. I want you to feel every part of this. Not just the pressure, the fiber, the warmth. He exhaled steadily. Tell me, she said. The texture, he said. I can feel. I've never noticed the texture this much. Every fiber. Because everything else is taken away, she said. Your eyes. I have your eyes. She drew the rope over his right shoulder, slowly, almost languorously. All you have is what you feel. And what you hear. She built the harness with half the usual speed and twice the intention. Each pass of rope was an act of attention. Not just technical application, but touch. Genuine and deliberate. Her hands in constant contact with his skin as the pattern grew. She felt the warmth of him. She felt the tension in the muscles beneath her palms, and she worked with it. The rope settling into the landscape of his body rather than overriding it. You're beautiful in rope, she said. She had not said this before. She felt him hear it. The small change in his breathing, the slight lift through his chest. I don't say things to manage the scene that aren't true, she continued. The rope crossed his sternum. You know that. Everything I say in this room is real. That was real. Yes, ma'am, he said, and his voice had a quality in it she had not heard before. She worked lower. The rope wrapping his waist, the knots placed with the same careful precision, but her hands lingering now at the edges of each placement. The side of his hip, the ridge of his oblique, the warm skin just above the waistband of his shorts. Not crossing any line, but honest about the territory. I think about this space, she said conversationally, her fingers drawing a rope down his right side. When I'm not here, I think about what I want to do with it. With you in it. She brought the rope around his left side, her hand following it. I've been thinking about tonight specifically for 5 days. His hands, at his sides, unclenched and reclenched. She noticed. I have your hands, she reminded him. You don't need them for anything. Let them be open. The hands opened. She secured his wrists behind him with the single-column cuffs, and this time when she brought his arms back, she did it millimeter by millimeter, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of his back against the front of her shirt. She could feel him very deliberately, not leaning toward her, holding himself at the exact place their agreement placed him, waiting for her to define the space. The restraint of it, the trust of it, moved through her like a current. You're very good at this, she said softly. At holding still for me. I have reason to, he said. She attached the suspension lines and began the overhead work. And as she did, she talked. Not constantly, but in the deliberate rhythm of someone delivering information in the dark. What she was feeling as she worked, what she saw when she looked at him, what the evening's light did to the geometry of rope and skin. She narrated the scene from inside it. And she felt him receive each thing, she said, the way he received the rope, as information about where he was, what held him, what was real. When she raised him off the floor, he made a sound that was new. Not the sustained exhalation of release she had come to know. Something softer than that. Something that had her name in it without saying her name. She stood before him and looked at his face and allowed herself to look at it fully. The blindfolded eyes, the softness of his jaw, the quality of a face entirely given over to trust. And she thought, I could love this man. I think I might already. She kept that inside her for the moment. Let it be there. I want to try something new, she said. We discussed extended sensation. I'm going to use my hands as the primary instrument tonight. Not implements. My hands. You'll feel the difference. She paused. Tell me if anything changes in your consent. It doesn't, he said immediately. Nothing changes. She began with his shoulders, the flat of her palm moving across the sensitized skin of his upper back in long, deliberate strokes. This was different from the therapeutic post-session massage. This was touch with full awareness of itself, touch that knew what it was doing and did not pretend otherwise. She felt him shudder at the first contact, the whole line of his back responding, and she did not step back. She worked up to his neck, the base of his skull, where she knew he carried the most chronic tension, and she felt his head tip back slightly, involuntarily, the offering of it. Yes, she said quietly. Let it go. She worked down the line of his spine with deliberate pressure, reading the responses under her hands, where he yielded, where something held, where the warmth of arousal and the warmth of release had become indistinguishable. Her hands moved around to his sides, the obliques, the line of his ribs. She kept her touch above anything that crossed a line they hadn't built the agreement for, but she was not pretending the lines weren't there. Tell me what you feel, she said. Your hands, he said. A pause. I can't tell where sensation ends. That's correct. She ran her palms flat up his back again. That's what I want. Shannon. Her name again, like something he needed to say to confirm she was real. I'm here. I know. A breath. I just needed to say it. She stayed close to him for the remainder of the suspension, closer than usual, her presence a constant beside him, talking him through every sensation, every shift in the rope's tension as his body's weight distributed and redistributed. She gave him commands, and he followed them with the immediate, total compliance that still, after 8 months, made something in her go quiet and attentive. She told him to breathe, and he breathed. She told him to let his head drop forward, and he dropped it. She told him he was exactly where she wanted him, and she felt the sound he made at that move through the ropes like a vibration. She brought him down and worked the ropes off and walked him to the aftercare couch, and when he was sitting with his water and the blindfold removed and his eyes adjusting to the light, she sat beside him instead of in the chair across. Close, their shoulders almost touching. He turned his head and looked at her with eyes that were very dark and very present. Shannon, he said. I know, she said. He stopped. The careful engineer, the man who chose exact words, was choosing something not words. He reached out slowly and took her hand, not her fingers, her whole hand, wrapping both of his around it, and held it in his lap. She let him. She looked at their hands. She thought about the first night she had held his hand on the couch in her living room, the beginning of something. She thought about all the distance between that night and this one, and how much of it she had covered with her eyes open. We should talk, she said. About what we're building. Yes, he said. But not tonight. Tonight, I just want to. He looked at her. I want to sit here. If that's all right. It's all right, she said. They sat. Part 10. The night it all moved. 2 weeks later the car was back. Shannon saw it when she looked out the window at 6:15 on a Thursday evening, an hour before Anthony was due. It was parked in a different position than before, closer, directly across the street, and there was no attempt to conceal the observation. He wanted her to see him seeing her. She photographed it, sent it to her attorney, tucked a text to Anthony. Car outside. Niguel, you should know before you arrive. His reply came in under 3 minutes. On my way. He arrived at 6:45. She opened the door, and he came in, and without breaking stride he said, Is he there now? Yes. Good. And she understood, from his tone, that good meant I would like to know where he is. He went to the side window and looked at the street for a long moment, and she stood beside him and looked at the car and felt the cold thing and the warm thing simultaneously, the familiar dread and the unfamiliar, specific comfort of not being alone with it. He's watching the door, Anthony said. He always watches the door. He wants me to know he knows when I'm coming and going. Anthony turned from the window and looked at her. His face was, not angry, she noted. Something more considered than anger. Something that had been thought through. Shannon, he said. I want to ask you something, and I want you to hear it as a question rather than a statement. Ask, would you be willing to call the police now? Not if he approaches. Now, on the basis of documented stalking and violation of the intent of the restraining order process. She thought about it. Really thought about it. The restraining order isn't finalized yet. It complicates. I know. He was patient. I'm asking whether you'd be willing. Not whether it's the only option. She looked at the window. At the street outside. The car. The pale watching face. Yes, she said. Actually, yes. She called. The responding officer came within 20 minutes, spoke to Niguel briefly, took the documentation Shannon provided, and noted the ongoing restraining order process. The car left. The officer advised continued documentation and said the restraining order, when finalized, would give them more to work with. After the officer left, Shannon stood in her living room in the sudden quiet of a street without surveillance and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks: the full, simple ownership of her own space. Anthony was standing near the window. He had not hovered. He had stayed in the room, available and unobtrusive, while she had handled it herself. She noticed that. "Thank you," she said. "You made the call," he said. "You asked the question that made me think of it differently." He nodded, accepting the credit as partial rather than total, which was accurate. She crossed the room. She crossed the room and stopped in front of him and looked at him, and she thought about what she had been managing for weeks, the careful structure of it, the professional framework held up like a screen between wanting and having. And she thought about Vera's words, desire that is itself a form of precision. She thought about Dr. Harwell asking what agency looks like in your body. She thought about the hotel bathroom. She thought about all the rooms she had stood in while belonging to someone else. She was in her own room. She put her hand on his jaw. He went very still. The way he went still in the room, but with an additional quality, surprise. And beneath the surprise, the held breath of a man who has wanted something for a long time and cannot quite believe it's arriving. "I want to change the agreements," she said. Her voice was steady. "All of them. Tell me," he said. "Outside the room. I want us to be," she found the word, "real. I want this to be real. Whatever real is. I'm not good at being taken care of, and you should know that going in." "I know that," he said. "I don't. I'm not going to stop being who I am because we're." "Shannon." He said her name with the gentlest of interruptions. "I fell in love with who you are. I'm not interested in a different version." She held his gaze. Then she kissed him. It was not tentative. She did not do things tentatively. She kissed him the way she did everything in the room, with full attention and full intention, and she felt him make a sound against her mouth that was surprise and relief and months of patience finally released, and his hands came up to her face with the careful, reverent quality of someone handling something precious, and she pressed into that without a single molecule of apology. When they broke apart, he looked at her. "Shannon," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," she said. "All of it." "Yes." He kissed her back. No performance in it. No restraint. The kiss of someone who has stopped holding something. She felt the months of it in it. The double careful composure finally set down, and she thought, there it is. There's what was underneath the whole time. She pressed her forehead against his and breathed. "This is terrifying," she said. "I know," he said. His hands were in her hair. "Do you want to stop?" "No." She felt him smile. Epilogue. Architecture. The restraining order came through on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who handed Shannon an envelope with the brisk professionalism of someone who did this many times a day. Niguel Maton. His name on the documents in the formal language of legal distance. 200 feet. The term spelled out in black and white. The force of the law placed between her life and his observation of it. Shannon signed for the envelope and stood in her doorway in the autumn light and looked at the street, which was empty, which was simply a street. She thought, there are so many ways to be free. She went back inside, to where Anthony was in her kitchen. He had acquired, over the past month, a designated cabinet for his coffee and a specific mug he used without asking permission. And she had noticed these increments of habitation without requiring them to be discussed, because some things you could just let happen. He was measuring coffee with the focused care of a man who believed in precision, and he looked up when she came in. She held up the documents. "It's done," she said. He set the coffee down and crossed the kitchen, 3 steps, unhurried, and he opened his arms and she walked into them. His arms closed around her. She put her forehead against his shoulder and let herself be held in the complete and uncomplicated way of someone who had nothing to take from her, someone who offered without agenda, someone she trusted precisely because she had spent 8 months learning, in the most rigorous school available, what trust actually looked like. "Good," he said into her hair. "Good." She stayed there for a long time. Outside, the street was ordinary. The morning light was ordinary. The kitchen was warm. She thought about the woman in the hotel bathroom with a phone number in her pocket. She thought about the first time she had stood in the unfinished room with a screwdriver in her hand and felt, for the first time in years, that she was building something that was hers. She thought about Vera's hands on the ropes and the word precious and the word trust and what it took to earn them. She thought about what Dr. Harwell would say, probably, about all of this. She thought she would tell her. She thought she might be surprised. She pulled back from Anthony's shoulder just enough to look at his face. He looked back with the open, fully present expression she had learned was what he looked like without management. The real face. The one she had been the first, she thought, to be shown. "I want to revisit our agreements," she said. "All the frameworks. Build new ones." The corner of his mouth moved. "Session by session?" "Session by session," she agreed. "Or," he said, carefully, "we could build one big one. Something intended to last." She looked at him. She thought, this is what it feels like. To be in the right room with the right person and know it without having to talk yourself into it. "That," she said, "is going to require a very detailed negotiation." "Good thing I have all the time in the world," he said. She kissed him in her kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday morning with the restraining order on the counter and the coffee still brewing and the room downstairs quiet and waiting and entirely hers, and she thought, I am exactly where I chose to be. The end. The architecture of power.